Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Lena Rossi, the director of Finnish Cultural Institute here in New York, and I'm so happy to see you all here joining our programs together with Cooper Hewitt. We have been collaborating through a Möbius program, which is the program of our institute moving museum professionals, researchers in the fields of architecture, design, and visual art across the Atlantic. So from Cooper Hewitt, our friend Andrea Lipps has been to Helsinki about less than a year ago, to do research there at the Design Museum. And Suvi Saloniemi from the Design Museum Helsinki was here at Cooper Hewitt. And actually, this program tonight, which is part of the series of design talks, is kind of like a fruit of that program. And we're going to have two Finnish designers who are participating in the Beauty Triennial, Kustaa Saksi and Tuomas Markunpoika, who are going to discuss their ideas, their concepts of beauty, and their creative work in the field of design. And Andrea is going to be the moderator of the discussion. I just want to use the opportunity to thank Cooper Hewitt for wonderful collaboration. Andrea especially, and of course Karen McCarthy, who's also been great help to us during this process. And also our project manager at the Institute, Ilari Laamanen, who's been the driving engine behind the Möbius program. So without further ado and without taking more of your time, please, Andrea.
Thank you. Hi. I'm delighted to welcome all of you here tonight to Cooper Hewitt. I'm Andrea Lipps. Thank you, Elena Maya, for introducing us. I'm an assistant curator of contemporary design here at the museum and the co-curator of the exhibition upstairs, Beauty, Cooper Hewitt Design Triennial. So I hope all of you have had an opportunity to go upstairs and to see it. And tonight's program is generously sponsored by the Möbius Fellowship Program by the Finnish Cultural Institute. And Möbius, as Lena Maya had briefly introduced us, is a program for visual arts and museum professionals that is intended for transatlantic relationships and to foster and create those. And I was fortunate enough to have been a Möbius Fellow myself last spring. I moved to Helsinki for a month where I was graciously hosted by the Design Museum. And there I researched and worked very closely with them to share expertise and knowledge about our institutions and about international design practice. I met with countless designers. I conducted studio visits. I attended events and exhibitions. I visited factories and labs and enjoyed Finland's ever-lengthening days. I was there in May and June, which of course is a very magical time of year to be in Finland. So that opportunity very much enabled me to appreciate Finnish design on a much deeper level. And of course, that brings us to this evening. So I'm particularly delighted for this very special evening exploring new frontiers in Finnish design, which brings together two designers from Finland whose work is included in the exhibition upstairs. So both Tuomas Markunpoika and Kousta Saksi are two outstanding designers whose work is very much contributing to their fields in remarkable ways. So first tonight, Tuomas Markunpoika will speak to us about his work. So Tuomas creates everyday objects that seek to elevate ideas of function by exploring metaphysics and meaning. His projects range from industrial design to limited edition pieces for galleries and for collectors, and have been shown internationally in museums and galleries and in art fairs. And Tuomas was trained as an industrial designer at Finland's Lahti Institute of Design. And after an exchange at the Danish Design School in Copenhagen and an internship with Marcel Anders in Amsterdam, Tuomas pursued a more conceptual path for design. So he graduated then with a master's degree in contextual design from Design Academy Eindhoven in the Netherlands. And he set up his practice in Amsterdam, where he currently lives and works. Our second speaker tonight is Kustaa Saksi, who also curiously lives in Amsterdam. Kusta is an awarded graphic designer and illustrator whose practice has expanded to include textiles, environments, objects, and more. And all of these are unified by this very playful, almost psychedelic abstraction of nature that pushes at the edge of perception. So we'll see more about that in a moment. His work has also been displayed internationally at museums and galleries, and he counts companies such as Marimekko, Nike, Issey Miyake, and LVMH among those who have commissioned his work. Kusta is trained as a graphic designer, also at Lahti Institute of Design, before he then moved to Paris in 2004 and then later to Amsterdam, where he also currently lives and works. So it's my great pleasure to welcome them both here this evening, and of course to welcome each of you for joining us this evening. So the way that we're going to run this is I will first invite Tuomas up, and he'll present to us for 15 minutes about his practice and his work. And then Kusta will come up and join us. And then the three of us will sit down for a conversation before we open it up to all of you for questions. And I will also note that as a part of the triennial, our next public program is in 2 weeks with Richard Neeson, who is a Dutch designer, and I would very much encourage all of you to come in and participate in that as well. So without further ado, I would love to welcome Tuomas.
Hi, hello everybody. So my name is Tuomas Markunpoika, and somebody made a good introduction for me, so I don't think I need to do that anymore. The work you've seen upstairs is the cabinet that I graduated with 2012 from Design Academy Eindhoven. And that project started out as, when I was studying in the Netherlands in the Design Academy. My grandmother was at that time diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and for me not to be present in Finland, also there would support my family, and so I still was very much affected by the conditions, and I wanted to somehow reflect that in my work, so what I was starting to kind of ask questions like why. I mean, also to criticize my profession and being like as a designer, like why do we make objects that are so different from us, how we're human beings, that we're fragile, we have emotions, we have feelings, we have dreams, and we get inspired, and why do we try to control our design world in a way that it's contrary to how as human beings. So for me the result was then to make a cabinet to start with, and how I wanted to do this is to I took an existing piece of furniture, in this case it was a wooden cabinet, and I started welding these metal rings around the object to cover the piece like semi permanent layer, and after which I have covered the piece. I set the whole piece on fire, which you see in this case, in this picture. And so what I have left is this kind of an exoskeleton of more like a memory of the former piece. And So this was my kind of translation of to make objects that are more fragile, because I think fragility in objects is something that makes them more precious to us, makes them more human, and we can really resonates with us. We care more about them, and they have more this kind of human aspects in them. And this is also another of my graduation work. So these are the two works I graduated with, and this is the two pieces I did while studying, and after which I extended the work to further to make more pieces of furniture. In this case, this is a chandelier I made for as a commission work for a gallery in London, and I also have included a few other pieces as a commission work for private clients, like mirrors and similar work. And here is the work I made a few years ago. It's called Amalgamated, and in a way it has a similar kind of aspect to the origins, that I use very kind of industrial, mass-produced material, which in a way is very kind of anonymous and kind of a commodification in a way. And what I try to do with this is to kind of translate those into more as a language of my own. So here, like, the starting point was to take as this mass-produced tool object and to kind of use it in a more holistic way to make the pencil something on its own, rather than using it as a primary purpose. And here you see like the pencils that are glued on one side to another to form like a large blocks, and they are then turned in a lathe to achieve shapes such as these. And maybe it's maybe I actually made a little bit of jump there. Maybe it's good to show the video actually in the previous project. So this is like the making of one unique piece I made, and
Thomas, this is you
that's me, yeah.
welding around all the steel rings around the chair.
Bad.
Yeah, it's a lot of practice, you know. And following that, I think it's show you a video of this amalgamated collection. So this is also more like a making of video. So it's easy to very easy to understand how the process goes. Also another very labor-intensive work. Back here. And this is the recent project I did about 6 months ago. It's called Distant Lights. And this was kind of like it's a bit of a continuation on the topic of my graduation work, which is what is kind of like oscillating between this temporality and death and memories. And so, but I focused here a bit more on because kind of Japanese philosophy and aesthetics on like wabi-sabi, and
Are you playing the next
Video is on
still. Oh. Sorry about that. And so in the starting project was the starting of this project was kind of because it is like it's a culture and tradition that's not inherently mine. It's more like in the Eastern and Japanese form of philosophy and metaphysics. So it's kind of a research on like how kind of Western designer approach these topics, that are not inherently part of my culture, and so I focused on this kind of wabi-sabi culture, which takes roots in impermanence and irregular shapes and austerity, and it's very much opposed to kind of Western philosophy where we tend to take control over our surroundings and environments, how we try to master it and try to force it into something, and that we try to control it too much. And this, of course, I realized that to try to transfer this kind of very different concept of metaphysics and aesthetics to my view would be very almost silly to try to mimic or to use the kind of traditional materials or the traditional forms of making, and because then like there's always like this pitfall of when trying to do so, it very easily turns into this kind of pseudo Zen jargony and very like use of like just borrowed aesthetics and borrowed concepts and not really formulating your own. So I kind of focused one aspect on this wabi-sabi culture, which is this rock gardens, karensui gardens, or the dry landscape gardens. And there's one garden in Kyoto, which I visited. I did like an excursion for about 6 weeks in Japan for this project. And there's a garden in Tokyo, I can't remember, in Kyoto, I can't remember the name of it, but there's one, particularly in this garden and most of the gardens, there's like one way of looking at the garden. Like there's one perspective, one narrow place where you're supposed to be able to perceive the garden as it is. And that was also like a very interesting point of view, that there's only one way looking at an object. But, and then you have these, in the garden you have these ripples on the stones, like from the gravel, which is reflecting kind of this pond, like ripples on a pond. And so I was very, very curious about like how would these kind of translate into more like my points, but more like Western kind of like scientific or more kind of logic in a way. And so I made this collection of lights, which I used a Fresnel lens as a kind of a projector and a reflector. And because of this kind of circular pattern, this is the diffraction pattern, I suppose, and which is kind of the same as they have in the rock gardens. And also with this object, the same way, there's not really, there's only one perspective in which you see as intended. So this is the view from the back. So you do get this kind of like a symmetrical pattern from the lens as a reflection, and but it always shifts on your perspective, how you move around the room. And on the wall you see a projection of that light. And so also this is also my way of putting it. Like I didn't want to use traditional materials like clay and wood and all these natural Zen marketed kind of magazine commodifications, and here are the collection of these pieces. So they come in different colors and lights. So I use like LED technology in these, and this is acrylic lenses. And I'll also show you a video of this because it's very difficult to take a photo that would explain it, like how the dynamic of the piece as you walk around. Close this so there's not going to be another video playing in the background. Yeah, and here's the next slide. Thank you.
Hello everyone. First of all, I would like to apologize that I might be actually forgetting some words because I've been on a really long haul from Hong Kong via Amsterdam to New York. So and I haven't really slept a second last night. So like, if I pass out, please help me. So yeah, my name is Kusta, and I was born in a small town called Kouvola in Finland. And at one point, I wanted to study graphic design Lahti Institute of Design. And I graduated from the school in the year 2000, which is a long time ago. And after my graduation, I used to work a couple of years in Helsinki for different agencies. But then 2003, I think it was, I wanted to spread my wings and I moved to Paris. And in Paris, I was working with different fashion labels and did a lot of like work for varied companies. But I really, at that time, I really specialized in illustration, and I've been doing illustration actually for the past 10 years. After 4 years in Paris, I kind of I thought it was enough of that city, and I packed all my stuff in a van and drove to Amsterdam instead, and rented a studio over there, and I felt that it's like a good place for me, and I've been there now for almost 9 years, and I'm still having my studio there, and I'm working and living in Amsterdam. But I've been, like I said, I've been doing and specializing in illustration for the past 10-15 years, and I've been doing a lot of like different kinds of projects, varying from stamps to posters, all kinds of kind of like big and small projects. Like for example, this one is made for a Finnish railway company, VR. So they wanted to have this sort of like scenery from the Finnish nature and countryside, and I illustrated their cars in different illustrations. And this one is for a couple of years ago. This is a poster made for PlayStation, and my main material has been paper for the past 10 years, and it's been pretty flat and 2D. And I think at one point I kind of like got a little bit bored even of this material. But I've been also doing some animation work every now and then. This one is actually animation work I did for an Italian fashion brand called Salvatore Ferragamo. So it was for their new watch and sunglasses line. Then at one point I kind of like got really into installations, but still for this project I was using a lot of paper, as you can see. This is a paper pavilion I did together with the Swedish top Swedish architect called Gert Wingård, and it was made for Stockholm Furniture and Light Fair in 2013. And it kind of like it consisted of over 15,000 A3 papers, and kind of like formed this sort of like a dome. And when you entered inside, you could see this sort of like it kind of almost looked like an altar, and we were really like inspired by mosaic and from this like old ceiling paintings from churches and temples around the world. So that really took some time to build up. There was like there was a lot of people working for it for 2 weeks, and it only lasted for 2 weeks, and then they took it down, and all the papers were actually distributed to different kindergartens near Stockholm area. And actually, like because it was like purely made out of paper, they had to have the fire brigade patrolling there all the time for the time being when it was built up. So like it was so easily flammable. This is another installation work. It's a shape of an egg, and it's I made it for Frankfurt Book Fair for Finnish department in the year 2014. And the shape of an egg kind of like resembles the Nordic mythology where the egg is actually the kind of like center of the universe, and then it's been decorated with this kind of like Nordic mythology and all kinds of different creatures. At one point, I started to do quite a lot of pattern design, and this is an example of pattern design I did for Nike's Jordan brand. They are always celebrating the Chinese New Year, and this is the pattern for the Year of the Horse, and they use it for many different apparel as well. But this is the shoebox and the sneakers. And then I've been, of course, working a lot with Finnish brand Marimekko as well, and I've done this is actually from my first collection for them, and I did quite many prints for their fashion line and also for their home line and tableware and a lot of different things. This is actually a pattern for the tablecloth, and here's the same pattern kind of like implied to the teapot. And here you can see also some pillow designs. And this is actually my latest pattern I did for them. This is for the summer 2016 collection. It's kind of like flower power pattern. This is really where my current passion is at the moment. I was working with wool for the first time around 6-7 years ago when I designed a collection for an Italian knitwear manufacturer called Jacquard Portofino, and I kind of like understood like how great material wool actually is, and I really wanted to make more out of it and to kind of like to understand wool better. But then like somehow like years just passed, I didn't have a chance to work with that. But then at one point, I think it was around like 4 years ago, I decided to go to Holland's textile museum, which is based in Tilburg, and I discovered their Jacquard weaving technique, and I started to study it, and I've now been studying for 4 or 5 years, and it completely opened up kind of new world for me, and kind of I could actually kind of apply my designs into something like more three-dimensional. I really kind of like the idea of that I can actually touch the material and really feel something, like instead of just using paper as a material. So I started to produce tapestries, and that textile museum is actually very well known for making tapestries for hundreds of years for the castles in northern France and in Belgium. So they have a long history, and like their quality is really outstanding over there. But I really wanted to do kind of like contemporary tapestry, partly because like the tapestry culture is such rich thing in the Nordic countries. It's also somewhere else, but like especially in the Nordic countries, people kind of like tend to want to use them on their walls at home, and it's such a kind of great culture. But I kind of like wanted to reinvent it a little bit, so I started to make this sort of like contemporary tapestries, mixing a lot of different kinds of materials. I really like to kind of combine natural elements or natural materials with something like really high-tech materials, for example rubber or plastic or some. I mean, it can be a reflective material or neon, because I think they usually tend to become quite interesting results. And this photo is from the Tailors Museum in Holland. And I've been actually making, this is actually my third collection of tapestries. And they're all kind of based on dreams. And I have a family member who is kind of like suffering from this like really kind of vivid dreams. They call hypnopompic dreams, where she doesn't really kind of like know where the sleep ends and waking up starts. And I love to kind of like hear her stories from what she's been seeing, and then I kind of like interpret those dreams into my artworks. And this image is actually from a gallery called Siu. It's kind of like an experimental architecture greenhouse / gallery in Taipei, Taiwan, and I had a chance to exhibit my tapestries there last year. And here they are in music center in Helsinki. And actually, like last summer, also Bergdorf Goodman wanted to use some of my tapestries in their summer windows. And this is a close-up of that collaboration. And here's some photos of my latest collection, which is called Wool Gathering. And these were just exhibited in Hong Kong last week for the first time. So thank you very much.
Hello. All right, I'm going to take the mic that works so you can hear me. So hi guys, thank you again so much for being here with us and for presenting your work. And I have so many questions to ask you guys, but I do want to leave time, of course, for our audience to also ask questions, because I'm sure many of you do as well. You know, I was really struck in both of your presentations by what seems to be this importance of material and process, and even and how those contribute to narrative. And so, for instance, Tuomas, I'd love to start with you. The piece upstairs, I hope everyone has had a chance to see it. It's the cabinet piece. And of course, you've used steel in creating that cabinet. As we were talking about earlier, steel, of course, is often used because it's perceived as this perfect material. It's often used in mass production, but you've really mutilated it and through this firing process and hand cutting it. And so what I'm curious to find out is, you know, if you could talk to us about the importance of material and the process itself in your work, where that figures in your process.
Well, I think it really depends on the project, because sometimes I do start a project, maybe it is based on a material that I find interesting, maybe there's an effect that I like, or maybe there's a texture I like, or maybe there are some kind of metaphysics and like other like ideas I can implement on that material, and then I just kind of use that material as a medium of bringing out those ideas. And I think it's really depends on the project pace. Like sometimes I can go for months even just to look for a certain effect or not even think about materials. Can go several weeks even not sketching or just about processing the idea of what you want to do and what you want to say with the work.
Well, and let me ask you about the engineering temporality, like the cabinet, for instance. So, of course, the entire concept behind the cabinet is this evocation of memory and impermanence. And so, did the concept come first, and then you decided to work with that material in that process? I mean, what was that process for you?
Well, I mean, it is my graduation work, so I think most people can understand the process is very chaotic. Of course, the origin of that it started as a concept, and I wanted to work further with it. But I think in that particular case, it was more in the beginning. I was much more focused on creating a concept that would be like. In a way understandable, and it could have a reach to people that you can translate something into a physical work that is very tangible and also understandable to the audience. I think that the material itself came along at some point, and as you say, that it was more like as an industrial kind of symmetrical horn-like process material, which doesn't really have these connotations of any kind of human aspect or anything related to human beings.
And pencils? I mean, how did you get inspired to work with pencils?
Well, I always had this big jar in my desk, which is just containing hundreds of pencils. And I barely use them ever. Like I said, I don't necessarily sketch a lot. And when I do, I only use like a black ballpoint pencil most of the time. I'm not saying that I don't like colors. I just don't usually work with them. But I just wanted to find some use for that, and somehow I showed in the video a little bit when you started to sharpen the pencils. Like if you sharpen it a bit, not in a standard way, you start seeing that there's some kind of beauty inside of it, like a structure that usually it's always hidden inside. So I thought, hey, why not do something that just reveals the beauty of the inside, and multiply that effect and make something bigger, like an entity of smaller units.
Oh, that's lovely. And Kusta, materials for you. For the past, 10 years or so, you were talking about how you work with paper, and ultimately when you went into 3 dimensions, it was still paper, largely with that installation. I mean, can you tell us about that process for you of then moving into 3 dimensions and having all of a sudden this tactility to your illustration that hadn't existed before?
Yeah, like I said, I think that completely kind of opened a new world for me, and I was I started to be a little bit bored with paper material already, so I really felt that I needed something else, and I kind of wanted to create something kind of a bit more like objects that I can turn around and I can touch, and they feel something, and
I mean, I'll throw this out to both of you. So does process in a way help generate narrative in your work in any way? I mean, Tuomas, for you, for instance, with the cabinet, I mean, the process and the material, does that generate narrative?
Yeah, of course. It's I think within, if you develop any concept and working materials, they do work side by side.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very good way of also working, because the other one always affects the other one. And so it's not very, my process is never linear. It's not, I mean, I might have an idea that's wanting to be linear, but it's just never going to work like that. So I think it's just accepting the fact that it's just, kind of it oscillates between the concept and the material, and it develops to another direction. And I think you need to let it naturally flow as it goes.
Yeah, also for me, I think the wool and this sort of like really soft yarns were just perfect sort of base for creating artwork around dreams, because they kind of like I like the idea that they kind of blur the senses a little bit, and kind of they kind of like unsharp my images in a nice way, so they kind of like they become much more blurred than if it was, for example, paper.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because so much of your work, even on paper, the illustration and such, it seems to be playing with perception in a way. I mean, there is something that's very psychedelic within your work, whether it's on paper or within the tapestries. So where does that interest in perception originate for you?
Well, I think it's like I've always been interested in kind of like dream world, and also kind of like a bit like weird kind of states of mind in a way, and kind of like strange color combinations that you know you can. Well, I've been also like influenced quite a lot of like 60s, 70s psychedelic era, and like you know, yeah.
And Art Nouveau.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
do.
Yes,
I
yeah.
definitely see the influence of Art Nouveau as well in your work.
Yeah, and what I really like about Art Nouveau and Art Deco movements is that like they usually take the inspiration from the nature. What I always, like, well, many times like when I start sketching things, I usually kind of like start from the natural shapes, from the shapes from the nature, and then kind of like work on them and simplify them so that they will fit into my world.
Yeah. Well, and that's what's so interesting, actually. They're in a way, both of your works and practices seem to be about nature. I mean, whether it's, you know, really playing with forms and shapes inspired by nature, and Tuomas, for you, very much seeking to create objects that are much more reflective of our own human condition and fragility in nature. And I'm really curious about, of course, your Finnish backgrounds, and Finland itself. There is just such incredibly magical nature that exists there. I mean, to what extent do you think your Finnish backgrounds have contributed to your own practice? And
I think it has a lot of influence. I mean, like when I was a kid, like we were always like after school, kind of like wandering in woods, you know, like that. That was really the place to go. Yeah, exactly. So it kind of like feels really kind of a natural place to be, and yeah, you could always find like surprising, interesting things in the woods. So.
yeah.
Also, there were not really that many things to do, to be honest.
Exactly. That's why there was.
You're wandering around, right? And, you know, I mean, how was it for you? Was it similar?
Well, I do have a bit of a similar kind of childhood. Yeah, I mean, it's in a very kind of boring concrete suburb, but it was in the middle of the forest, of course, of Finland. So, so yeah, I mean, that was pretty much the pastime between things. Always just playing in the forest, doing stuff, going swimming, building huts. I don't know, like. So yeah, definitely, I think it has much more, like visually at least, much more effect on Kusta's work than in mine, because I also tend to work on a bit like not so natural materials, or like do shapes that are now not necessarily like adapted from natural shapes.
But you also taught. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I mean, like, yeah, like I think woods were kind of like the only kind of beautiful place in my hometown, because my hometown is actually, it's many times considered the Chernobyl of Finland. So they kind of like have the same sort of skyline. So.
But nature.
But nature, exactly. That was the place where to escape. So.
But it's interesting though, because you even talk about, in Tuomas, for you, you know, I mean, going around and building huts and doing things in nature, and I actually see so much of your work is very much about the physical process itself. I mean, you're very much working with your hands and such, so you see that. So what I have to say also struck me when I was just creating the intro remarks for tonight is the parallel that exists for both of you. I mean, you both are from Finland, you were born and raised in Finland, but now you're both expats, and you both happen to live in Amsterdam. So tell me about this decision to live outside of Finland and practice outside of Finland.
Well, I think it was, for me, the decision was very clear already somewhere like second, third year of my bachelor's degree. I honestly don't think that there was anything for me in Finland in terms of my profession. And it's very kind of limited, it's very limiting things you can do in Finland. And because of the more this kind of conceptual approach to design, it's not really, never really caught up there. I think it's a very kind of, it still lives on some kind of modernist hangover period that, and everything is just, there's no fun, there's no joy in things. And like, it leaves very little room to work on. And I think it also has a lot to do with like, there are very few internationally renowned people coming to Finland, like in terms like Aalto, for example. So it seems like this heritage is also a bit of a burden because like you're always a little bit in the shadows of that. Like everybody expects that this is something you need to do, this is something you need to be. Like it's given a very kind of restricted framework. This is how you're supposed to be because you're Finnish. This is how supposed you think, this is how supposed you're doing things. And like, I think it's a bit of a suffocating environment for me at least. And I found that freedom outside, that you know, you just, the only thing you need is a passport and that's it, you know, like it's very easy to go and just do what you want.
Yeah. Also style-wise, I think my work has never kind of like been kind of like typically Finnish. It's kind of like, it's always been more maximalist. I mean, like I always like to have like lots of details and so I kind of, I also think that it was easier to find my audience somewhere else.
You know, it's interesting because actually when I was in Helsinki and meeting with all of these countless designers, we ultimately ended up talking about this incredibly powerful design history that exists in Finland. And I have to say, actually, the majority of them always talked about it as a bit of a burden and that you were constantly in the shadow of these greats and sort of these heroes of design. So it's very interesting that you've taken this opportunity to step outside, but yet you still see these Finnish influences, I would say, very much in your work. I'm also curious about even your use of color, because I mean, you'll have to tell me about this, but you know, color, for instance, upstairs, you'll see the exhibition runs from this very polychrome world of multiple colors and collisions of colors to this monochrome world of black and white. And you see that actually in both of your practices. So Kusta, for instance, you work with just these incredible color combinations. In what way does that respond at all to Finland? I mean, I can't help but think about, of course, the very long days that I experienced, but on the reverse side of that, the extreme long darkness that you have as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to say where this color use for me kind of comes from. I mean, it's always been, I've always kind of like used a lot of color quite naturally, and I don't know, maybe it does have something to do with a bit colorless kind of surroundings where I was as a kid, or I don't know. It's really difficult to say where it comes from. Well, of course, like there's good examples of like great color use. For example, like Finnish brand Reveille, who is like really known for amazing bright colors, and it's also quite psychedelic actually.
Yeah, it's true.
But you really messed it up. I mean, that was so cool seeing that Marimekko like all stone.
Yeah, I think I spoiled it.
And you know, the one thing also that I'm very taken with in both of your, actually the pieces upstairs, is your inspiration from family members, actually. So the Hypnopompic series itself, you've mentioned, is inspired by a family member. Of course, the Engineering Temporality series, Tuomas, is inspired by your grandmother. So can you talk about the starting point for your projects? And
yeah, I mean, of course, it's like because it's such a kind of like like personal project, especially for someone who is actually seeing these dreams. It was a little bit kind of maybe difficult in the beginning, especially when I started to make my kind of like own interpretations of them, and then like then the person who is actually seeing the dreams like says like, no, it's not like that, you know.
Oh,
like,
so you really had
feedback.
feedback.
I did have feedback, yeah. So like, but then I kind of like then I wanted to go my own way, and kind of like I kind of understood that these are kind of my own artistic interpretations of the dreams, and I have the right to do it. So
Yeah. So it's fine. You have the artistic license, right? And for you, Tuomas, I mean, just the starting point, of course, being this very moving moment of your grandmother being diagnosed with Alzheimer's. The pencils, for instance, that you saw at your desk, and what are how do you begin kind of your next project? Where do you find your inspiration?
Well,
It's convoluted.
Well, for example, there's something that kind of I stumbled upon a little bit on the last project I did, which is Distant Lights. And for example, reading this book by our author is Tanizaki. I think it's written somewhere. I think it's pre-war Japan. It's called In Praise of Shadows, and for example, in that book, like he explains like how to say, I cannot quote him very perfectly, but how he's explaining like how I should have the book with me here. Maybe to summarize that quote in a few sentences, to say that like there is like there's beauty in darkness, all the shades of gray and all these kind of murky areas of the house, and that by us, like let's say the introduction of electric lighting into Japanese culture, how it destroyed certain cultural forms and art forms, because they were put under the floodlights, or like electrical lamps replaced oil lamps and candles. So the whole cultures and art forms were developed under different conditions. So how like this destructive this can be to a culture, but also like, of course, it has practical implications on like adapting electrical lighting instead of oil lamps. But like, what is that we lose in the process of that? Like, what kind of feelings and emotions are also lost and gone with this kind of introduction, new technology. So this is kind of the starting point of like why. I mean, I'm developing a range of lights that are definitely has nothing to do with illuminating. It's more of this kind of more like meditating, or like creating very subtle, more like subtle shadows rather than subtle lighting. And so just to take a different approach to that. So that will be one of my next projects. Yeah.
Well, I think at this point we need to open it up for questions. So we'll take any questions that you guys have in the audience.
What's the font?
what's the font? I have no idea. Hi, sorry.
And actually, is this in Finland?
This is actually in Amsterdam, the Bos. It's a forest in Amsterdam. I mean, it's not a real forest.
Okay.
Like,
I was going to say, you're
but
still seeking out.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we've got a question back here.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I have a question which is not top of your mind, but it's something that's important for me or for us. We're kind of two European designers that just moved to New York. And I wanted to just objectively ask you about any kind of differences that you see between European and American style of design, or processes, or the way people are thinking about design, And I know that most of your projects are either self-initiated or for European clients, so we hear. But just kind of thinking about the world of design that we currently live in and the age of internet. What are your thoughts on this topic? Thank you.
Well, I think it's like overall, it's a little bit pity nowadays that like wherever you go, the design tends to be kind of like similar everywhere. But I guess it's because of the internet. Like you kind of like you see the same trends everywhere, and like I mean, it probably was different before the internet. I hope so, but I think like nowadays it's like even when you travel far away and you kind of like expect finding something really kind of like unique things, you kind of like end up seeing too much the same, and I think that's a real pity.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess this is down to the topic of like a bit of like the originality of work in the sense that like if you are in this kind of flux of trends and fashion, and it's really an international style. I don't think there is certainly anything to say this is like a European style or this is like a North American kind of thing. Or I think if by looking at the work, it could be basically anywhere from the world. I mean, it doesn't necessarily the origin of the culture of the person who did that doesn't necessarily matter anymore that much. I really don't know what would be the difference, the main differences, for example, between European design and North American. I don't really have that much of a.
But maybe the question was that the work that you're doing is so kind of that the work you're doing has this kind of ineffable purity and poetic character that maybe you don't see that much here. That America is just so commercial and everybody's so just getting by, right? Is that kind of like an idea?
Yeah.
Is that what you meant? Like, what the fuck? How do you get to do that stuff?
Yeah, because that's you do see much more conceptual type work in Europe than you do here.
Well, I think at least in the case of Netherlands, I mean, I know I've experienced this firsthand that there used to be much more, but there still is some form of subsidies or support for artists. And so this really enables people, designers, you're nodding there,
Yeah.
I guess you agree on this. So,
It's a big difference.
yeah, it really makes a big difference because of course you are a little bit relieved from this commercial pressure of making money with your work to the amount you can sustain yourself, even with your family or something. And I think that really enables artists and designers to work more freely and create something, give them more time to do things, give them more time to think over things. And I think it seems like here those kind of support is lacking a bit.
Yeah, you're kind of thrown out into the world and have to fend for yourself. And yeah, and oftentimes it ends up moving into.
Let's say like 10, 15 years ago, that was a very different thing. Like in Netherlands, if you graduate from school, basically the government would pay you salary just to be an artist, you had no commercial pressures.
Wow.
And you could almost live with that money.
Yeah.
And just freely create. And of course, if your income reaches a certain level, they need to pay something or not receive those funds anymore. But not anymore. Too bad. Stay here.
That type of design, that culture doesn't really exist in Finland.
There were like reasons behind the logic that how people still behave, and they don't see the reason why a chair would cost 10,000 euros, for example. Why would I pay money for that?
Right.
But they do see the reason to buy 10,000 euros stair equipment. That's the thing. The weird thing about it. But it's just a way of like how you spend your money. What's your priorities? Like a new car, a new chair. I don't know. Like it's just.
Right. Well, and design, particularly in Finland, has always been incredibly democratic. I mean, when you look at Itala and Artek, and you've got these incredible design heroes who are creating this very accessible design. It seems like the idea of design being somewhat inaccessible or too expensive seems.
Yeah, I think it's
like
seen.
the antithesis
I think it's seen very like elitist, kind of a way like everything. In a way, is thought that it should not cost a certain amount of money, and then everybody should be able to afford that. And well, I mean, it's of course just one way of looking at it and how things should be. But
I just kind of wanted to.
Well, it's kind of like, I mean, it kind of happened. I think I always had kind of good kind of like supportive agencies that have been kind of like supporting me and who have been finding me commercial work as well. So I think because especially like as a young illustrator, you don't really have the context, and I think at that time especially those agencies really helped me a lot to kind of like to find the right places to starting to work. I mean, in the beginning I was working a lot for magazines, but then it kind of like evolved more into at some point a bit more to advertising, and then after that to patterns and now kind of like maybe more into installation. So it's been kind of like this kind of like evolving thing.
This is also for Kusta. So I'm actually a textile designer myself. When you started getting into your installation work with the Jacquard tapestry, were you originally working with a commercial manufacturer to do those things? Or, you know, you said you worked for Nike, for example. Like a lot of times, like here in the States, it's really hard to get connections with manufacturers. That's what I was wondering.
No, I was working directly with Nike. I mean. And I was only kind of like designing the pattern for them, so they kind of like they took it from there and like made the designs for the shoes, you know, and adapted the pattern for them for their products.
And then moving into your tapestries, you had the good fortune of working with the Tilburg Textile Museum.
Yeah, exactly. That's quite a unique place in the world. I think it's quite an amazing place where. Where the textile museum actually has this kind of like textile lab where you can kind of go with your ideas of making an artwork, and then they can help you to kind of like realize it. I mean, of course, like they don't accept everything, but but if you have a good idea, it's a great place to work with.
All right, and I actually just, before we wrap up here, I have one more question, because of course, we're here because of beauty, our exhibition, and so we had asked you guys once for the book, what beauty means to each of you, and I'd love for you to share some of that here. So what does beauty mean to each of you?
I can start. What does beauty mean to me? I mean, well, for me, beauty always has this kind of like a fraction in a way. And you were mentioning earlier this wabi-sabi kind of. It's kind of like Japanese philosophy, kind of based on.
Irregularity, austerity, modesty.
Yeah, and I exactly.
That's Finnish. Yeah.
And I think there's something really great in this wabi-sabi aesthetics that kind of like that I completely share in my aesthetics as well. You know, like using like you know. Not make things perfect, but kind of like a bit like asymmetrical and like leaving blank spaces, or like things are not kind of things are never finished in a way, and nothing really lasts. And I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I think beauty for me maybe is more like a concept of something that evolves always and changes and kind of mutates. I think the beauty is really more like a human interpretation of a thing or over a thing that really gives the meaning, you know, the meaning of beauty to you, whatever that is. And I think, yeah, it's also highly personal, like very, very subjective thing. And I mean, I know I only have to look at myself and like realize the things that I maybe loved some while ago. I just can't really tolerate that anymore. And yeah, I think it's yeah, I mean, it's very interesting topic, also very beautiful topic. I mean, beautiful topic, sorry. But I meant to say very difficult topic because yeah, I think the concepts of beauty will change, and it's on personal level, also on cultural level, on social level, and yeah, I think you can have a topic beauty every year almost, and it's gonna have to be the same.
But I think everyone is kind of like, in a way, like aiming to beauty all the time, like whatever they are doing, like they kind of like aiming to be. I mean, like for example, cleaning up their house, you know, like.
Driven by, by beauty. It definitely is a part of the human condition, an essential part. So wonderful. Well, thank you, Kusta and Tuomas, and thanks to all of you for coming and joining us. We have the Finnish Cultural Institute sponsoring us tonight. And we hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you.